I just played the craziest game of chess of my entire life. There were ups and downs, blunders, lucky moments, and it was a fight till the very last move, and you will not believe how this game ended. So a little bit of background. This was the fifth and final round of a tournament I just played in. My opponent was Timothy, rated 2142 USCF. I'm rated 2100. The time control was 90 minutes for each player with 30-second increment. And we were both at 2.5 out of 4 going into the fifth and final round. So if any of us would win this game, we would get to 3.5 out of 5, which will likely put us somewhere tied for some sort of prize money. So winning this game is actually pretty important. So before the game, I decided to look at my opponent a little bit just to see what kind of openings he might play. And I saw that all his openings were with the move d4. So I was mentally getting ready to play this sort of setup. And when we got to the board, he surprised me on the very first move because he played e4. Alright, so nothing too crazy. We'll just get into my normal Sicilian stuff. I played c5. And right now, second move, he looked over at me and said, "We're gonna fight." He didn't say it out loud because you're not allowed to do that at tournaments. You get kicked out. But he did say it over the board by playing b4, the wing gambit. So basically, gambiting a pawn for a crazy game. So I'm going to just turn on the engine for a little bit, just so you can see what kind of evaluations we're getting. I was a little bit familiar with this, so I took. He played a3. And here I knew that d5 was one of the moves. And he took, and I took with the queen. Also notice that I'm threatening queen e5 check, which forks the king and the rook. So if he ever takes right now, this is a nice little trap that people might fall into, but not my opponent. He's just too good for that. He played knight f3, defending against the threat. I played e6. He took, I took. He played knight a3, going for knight b5, knight c7, maybe attacking this pawn too. So it was a little bit weird already, but I just developed my knights. He played knight b5, attacking a family fork here. I dropped my queen back to d8. He attacked my bishop, took over the center, and I played knight f6. And also notice that his threat right now would be bishop f4 to try to go for a fork here. So knight f6 is the only move that actually defends that, because if bishop f4, I can play knight d5, attack and defend. That's a nice resource. He played bishop d3, castles, and here I had to find a way to set up or develop my pieces further. I decided to play b6, going for obviously bishop b7 and easy development. That was very good so far. Queen c2, possibly lining something up over here. Luckily my knight defends it already. I just continued my development. Bishop f4, not really threatening anything. Knight here, I just attack it, and bishop here I move out of the way and then attack it. So there's no real threat right now. So I just played h6, but I was a little bit afraid of maybe knight e5's takes, pawn takes, and removes the defender, and then he takes here. So I decided to play h6. It's not the best move, but it's not worse. It's not giving up the advantage, so I'm still okay here. Well, the computer line here goes a6 with knight c7. This is why I didn't play a6. Knight c7 kind of forks all my pawns, but the computer finds some interesting line here that ends up taking the pawn back and some crazy exchange for two pieces and so on. I wasn't confident enough to play like this, so I just played normal moves. h6. And actually here he would have had a nice resource here to play queen d2, which would end up giving him a pawn, because he would take on h6, and then it would be very hard to, let's say I play some random move here. He would take on h6, and then it's very hard to stop knight g5 and checkmate threats over here. So that was very difficult. So in this case, the computer says I should go here, takes, and I can't really recapture, but let's see, what is it? A6. Yeah, so I can't really recapture, but I should have an okay position. But it obviously is very difficult. So you should have played that. But instead he played rook fb1. I played knight d5, an attacking move. a6, another attacking move. And then b5, just completely solidifying my advantage. So I'm very happy right now. He played queen d2, possibly getting out of any c4. If ever a c4, I got knight b4, forking his queen and bishop, so he kind of got out of the way of that, possibly threatening c4 right now. And I was also looking at ideas like knight c4, if takes, then takes my bishop, and then he could have got his bishop out of the way with check, because in this case I just take, but none of that really works. But I was a little bit worried about this sort of maneuver, so I played knight b6, which is a little useless. It kind of defends against knight c4, which was never really a threat, but it's kind of putting the knight out of the way, and it's not as well placed there. I should just played rook c8, and here obviously if knight c4 takes and attacks the bishop, so computer line goes bishop f1, and then now actually c4 is threatened because this bishop is hanging and my pawn won't attack his bishop. So bishop a8 and then c4 and takes and then attack the queen. And then after a5, black's position is very solid, up a pawn, so it should be much better. So that's what I should have done. Unfortunately, I played knight b6, which was still okay. Played knight c2. And here I didn't really see any threats, so I just continued my development with queen d7, maybe bring my rooks into the center. And unfortunately, though, he played bishop f4, and I realized that his threat of bishop takes h6 is quite dangerous, actually. Now let me turn off the engine for now. So bishop takes h6 is a little bit dangerous because at the very least, if he takes and I play f5 to block the checkmate, he at least gets a draw with perpetual check, leading to a threefold repetition. So I wasn't very happy with that. I really didn't want that to happen. I'm sure he wouldn't have played for a draw, but I was really worried. I wanted to try to play for a win. So instead I found the defensive move f5. I was also looking at g5 and maybe even moves like I was calculating moves like rook here to kind of get out of the perpetual check. And you'll see why I have to play my rook so far up. I was looking at lines like this, f5, and now if he tries to check me, I eventually run my king. If queen here, I block with the bishop, so that's fine. But if queen here, I need an extra square to run away with my king. And let's see if this line is good for black. So I was looking at this sort of line, which was very crazy, my king just running away. But eventually I settled on f5. It just blocks everything. My rook is a little more active. This pawn's a little bit weak on e6, but there's nothing except the rook. He played rook here, rook e1, attacking it. But this pawn's very hard to attack from any other directions, right? It's very hard to attack, and it's very easy to defend. There's like rook here, bishop here, knight here. It's very easy to defend. So it's not really a big weakness right now. So I still have a little bit of an advantage. And here I had many move options. I was thinking about, I didn't really see a threat because let's say I move my rook. If he ever sacks, I have rook f6 and defends everything. And I just felt, okay, I even have bishop f6, bring my queen in. I didn't feel threatened at all here. So I didn't see any threat. I was thinking about moves like rook f6, which was still keeping the advantage, like rook here, and even bishop here. But I decided to play bishop d6. I didn't really see much difference. And so a little bit after I played it, I realized, wait a minute. If he takes here, which is what he ended up playing, he took here, which luckily it was a small mistake, but I didn't know that. I thought that if he takes, I take, and he takes, My first idea was to play queen g7, which would have been bad because he has queen takes e6, and now he forks my bishop that I just placed there and now is undefended. So this would be horrible for me. All right, let's look at the engine too. And if I play queen g7, that happens. So if I play rook a e8 over here to defend the pawn, I saw that after queen g6, rook here, he has rook takes e6, which hits all my pawns here. And if I take his queen, this is still a fork. So I was getting very desperate here. I was like, oh no, did I just blunder? I was seeing all sorts of stuff on my bishop. And also I looked at moves like bishop c8 to defend this pawn, so that after queen check here, this pawn's defended, but he can still take, because if I take, once again, this is a fork. So I'm not feeling too good, and also one of the things I could do is play king h8 first and then block with a queen here. But unfortunately, this leads to a pretty crazy variation where all my pieces are just on the line of fire, hanging undefended. But luckily the computer finds a variation here to sort of save the day when he wins another pawn, knight d8 to keep everything protected. All my pawns get lost, but I do end up surviving with a rook up. So I could have done that too. But luckily, I found the only defensive resource here, which was knight to d8, defending this pawn here. But what is the difference? So the difference in this case is if queen g6, queen g7, rook here, I take with the knight, he forks me, he wins my bishop. But because I moved the knight out of the way for the bishop, and this pawn is pinned, I can actually take his knight. And he doesn't have time to take this knight because I'm threatening checkmate. So it was a good find for me. I realized that this bishop had to be open, so I did play that. And that was the only move. So way back here when I played bishop d6, I thought I blundered something big, and I was very sad about myself. But I was very lucky because it wasn't a blunder. I had knight d8. So I didn't see this beforehand, but I got very lucky. So he played knight g5, threatening moves like something over here. I played queen g7. I just wanted his queen out of my position. And obviously, if ever moves like this, I'm threatening checkmate. So even if he moves the queen back, I can maybe attack it or do something. So I was feeling kind of confident. So he didn't end up taking, which is good for me. The attack is pretty much over, but he does win this pawn. So I take, and he takes. Okay, so here I have some undefended pieces and they're getting attacked. I was thinking about moves like rook a d8, very solid, but I settled on rook f6, which I thought would force a trade of rooks, which is better because the less pieces, the easier for me to win a piece up, because he just sacrificed the bishop. So in my mind, I thought trading was the best option. I didn't blunder this. I did see that he can take here, because if I take the bishop, he takes my bishop. If I take the rook, he simply takes back. So he just won the pawn. And what I should have done here is I looked at this, I should have just taken his rook and then play king f6 and then start pushing the a pawn, and this would have been a very simple way to go forward. But I thought, why not just bring my bishop in, attack his rook, and pretty much force him to take me, because if he moves back, of course I just would take the bishop for free. So he has to take me. And over here, let me just scroll up the moves. And here I thought he had to move the bishop back, but he found a better move. He played knight e3. Okay, and now I'm going to turn off the engine. And here I thought, in my mind, I didn't see any threats, right? Because the bishop can't attack anything. If this knight ever moves, I take his bishop. So that's good. So I didn't see any threats, so I played a5. Okay, simple enough, except I did miss a threat. The threat was, for example, if a5, and I saw this a little bit after, and this is not complicated at all. The only attacking move is this, so he plays that, takes. But what I missed is that if I take this bishop, he takes my knight. So he takes 2 pieces and I take 1, so I basically lose my piece. So I have to take back. And what I missed here was the other only attacking move, bishop e4, which pins my knight to the rook, and the rook can't defend the knight from anywhere because all the paths are blocked. So I thought, oh my god, I'm just losing a piece. And I was already beginning to feel depressed and sad at myself because it was literally 2 of the only attacking moves. Like, those are the only 2, and for some reason I didn't see them. I thought I could just take the bishop after knight takes, but I was very sad about myself. But then I noticed, of course, that wait a minute, I'm actually a little bit lucky because I'm barely holding on. My king defends the knight and I'm just holding on. There's no more checks. Unfortunately though, he plays rook e1. And there's no actual threats right now for the bishop. No, there's nothing to attack, because if he takes, I just take back. But his threat is actually bishop f3 check, keeping an eye on the knight. So, for example, if I go here, and I'm going to turn off the engine evaluation for now, from now on actually. So if I play a random move, bishop f3 check, and my king cannot stay guarding this knight. He has to, let's say, go somewhere, and then he takes the knight, and if he takes that knight back, he's up right here 3 pawns. He's got 3 extra pawns here, and there's pretty much no chance I'm ever saving a position like this. There's no chance. So in my mind, I was just very unhappy because he's threatening this, and my pieces are just barely hanging on, but unfortunately barely is sometimes not good enough. I would have never allowed this if I would have seen those 2 moves. What I should have done instead was just move my bishop out of the way of the attack, somewhere like this, and then be free to push the pawn. So actually I have a line here, or do I? Never mind, I don't have a line here. Anyway, that's what I should have done, but instead I didn't see it. I didn't see the 2 moves, and now I think I'm losing because bishop f3 and bishop takes d5 wins a piece. But then I notice, wait a minute, I can move this bishop out of the way to make room for my king to keep defending the knight. So I had to choose somewhere to put my bishop, so I played bishop f8, finally keeping all my pieces well defended. And I thought, of course, if bishop f3, I just move here, and then I started looking at bishop d3 check, so bishop d3, and then he takes the pawn, and then I saw that I could take this pawn, and then start pushing this pawn, and I thought I was still better, which I am. Except that I wasn't safe after all, because after bishop f3, I saw that he could play rook e5, and he's just attacking my knight, and my knight's still pinned to the rook. The rook literally cannot defend the knight from any angle still, and at this position, I had pretty much given up hope because I just blundered 2 simple moves. I was beginning to feel very sad. I was angry at myself. I'm starting to accept defeat in this position, and I mean, I was just gonna take it all out. So I was gonna punish myself. Not by hurting myself, but in the gym, I was going to use this as like sort of motivation to do more and work harder and get better. But anyway, I was already thinking about what I would do to myself because this was the last round, and it would have been pretty sad. But unfortunately, this is what happened. And then after I saw that combination, I was like, wait, I should have just put my bishop here to keep defense of the e5 square. But I soon realized that after this, it doesn't actually keep defense of the e5 square. So what I should have done actually was bishop f4. Apparently the computer has this line, bishop f4, and after bishop here, there's actually g3, removing my bishop from the defense of e5, right? And there's nowhere to go. But there's some crazy variation with rook f8, giving up the bishop, and then knight c3, and then apparently these pawns might actually be very good. Right, okay. So that's what the computer says, and that would have been winning as well. So bishop f4, but I definitely didn't see just sacrificing my bishop. So now, what was I going to do? I wasn't going to resign. I was going to put up as big of a fight as possible. So I was looking at ways to make it more complicated, or as most complicated as possible. So I was first looking, if I just give up the knight, he's just going to have 3 passed pawns, and there's going to be just no chance. So what about moves like knight here defending the rook and giving up the exchange and hopefully trying to save something? Unfortunately, he can just take here, but even worse, he plays rook e8, and unfortunately my pieces are once again undefended. So much for putting my bishop here to be guarded. Now it's just a target, and there's no way that my pieces can defend each other, and they're just too far apart. And I was looking at a little bit of rook here, a4, but there's just not enough time. He always gets back, and I can't really push my other pawn, so that's kind of hopeless. So then that didn't work. And then I looked at the final option, which was knight takes e3, which gives up my other rook, but maybe I have some chance with some passed pawns. And after a little bit of analysis, that's actually what I did. I played knight takes e3, double exclamation mark. I just sacrificed an entire rook for free. Instead of losing the knight, I just lose the entire rook. All right, so he took, and he played I played a4 because, well, if b4, he takes this pawn. So I have to start pushing my pawns. And in all my analysis, I spent a couple minutes here. We had about 30 minutes each on the clock. I spent a little bit of time looking, and I didn't really see a very easy way for him to defend, but it's not my job here to find his winning moves. It's his job, so it wasn't really... I was relaxed. I was walking around. I mean, as relaxed as I could be. I still, in my mind, was thinking that I was just losing here. But in any case, it was his job to find the win. So he played rook c5, which I thought was the best move. I was looking at that move for quite a bit. Interesting line here. Computer gives bishop e4. And after I take, if he takes back, then these pawns are just going to be too strong. So he takes this pawn. And then I play a3. He plays g4. I play king c6. Because, okay, if a2, he can just stop it. But, I mean, it's kind of it will be kind of the same thing. Here, bishop here, a2 threatening to queen. No time to take the bishop because of the queen, so he moves here. I had defend the pawn with the knight. This is not what happened, this is what the computer gives. King g2, king b7, attacking the rook, and then after rook a5, there is bishop to b4. And if you notice here, this rook has to guard the a1 square for the promotion. But where can it go? The king controls these, the bishop controls these, and the knight controls the last two. So the rook is literally trapped. This is literally more and more looking like a position straight up from a study, like a composed problem where every piece has its purpose and every piece is defended, every square is defended once. It's like some sort of crazy endgame study. So this is what the computer gives, and this is obviously actually a crazy line with knight and bishop at the end. But in any case, he didn't see that. I didn't look at that. He played rook c5, which I thought was an even better chance of winning, because he just attacks my knight, and I have to play b4. Because if I move the knight, he takes this pawn. So I played b4, and here he played rook c4, which was a pretty good move, attacking this pawn here. And, well, if I push the pawn, he at least, well, either takes my knight or that pawn, so I can't do that. If I push this pawn, let's see, if a3, he takes a2. Looks like he cannot stop the promotion because all these squares are covered, except that he has this check here, and then stopping the promotion. And it's just very hard. I can't really block the rook. There's nowhere to block the rook here, and there's no way to attack it. So in this case, he is winning. But fortunately, I saw that my bishop's almost defending the pawn. My king just needs to get out of the way. So where to move it? So none of these squares are legal. King here doesn't defend the pawn. It's still blocking the bishop. King here kind of blunders bishop c6 and maybe pawn sacks or like bishop sacks on the pawn. So I played king e6, defending the pawn. He played d5 check, and also in this position I want you to notice that white would love to get this bishop somewhere over here to sack itself, do some sacrifices, and then use these extra connected pass pawns to win the game, like some sort of sacrifice. If he can get the rook for all these pieces, it's obviously winning. If you can get the bishop for 2 pawns, that's obviously winning. Some sort of sacrifice. But if you look at this knight controls these squares right here. And now let's think about the bishop. How is the bishop ever gonna get to defend some of these squares? There's literally no way. If he moves the bishop here, the knight's still guarding everything. There's no way in. He has to move the bishop like here, here, here. It's just too many moves. My pawns are going to promote. So the knight is literally sort of dominating this bishop, which is crazy. And also bishop very badly placed in the corner. So I played king e6 and he played d5 check. And here I had to make another decision. I can't block my bishop. I can't go here because of checks. And if here I thought like g4, and if here f4, and then I have to move back, is pushing his pawn. So I played king e5. And let me just scroll up a little bit. So he played f4 check, and here I played king f5, and this kind of prevents g4 because his rook's blocked. So my king is kind of stepping away from the checks. So what happened here? Because right now my threat is to just push the pawns 1, 2, 3. So what's he gonna do? And there's also no more rook checks to get behind them, so that's pretty good. He played bishop c6, maybe threatening to sacrifice, maybe threatening some checks. So I played a3. He checked me. I had to go back, and he played rook c6 check, and now he can get somewhere behind the passed pawns, and the bishop might have a little bit of a hope over here because I can't guard the square. So I played well, first of all, what are my options? None of these squares are possible. If king f7, I mean, maybe there's checks, so I wasn't too sure about that. So my only 2 options are really king g7 and king e7. And I thought, this pawn kind of is a little bit dangerous. He might promote. So I decided to just play king e7. And I didn't really see anything. I mean, it's attacking the bishop. If he tries to check me to get back here, I just take the bishop. So I played king e7. And it turns out that out of all those positions where I thought I blundered, it turns out that I actually didn't blunder at all. And in fact, and if we turn on the analysis here, this was my first blunder of the game. This was the first blunder of the game. And what happened was that over here, it's actually still winning. And this move is the one and only move that is actually still winning the game. Knight takes c3, double exclam, only move, still winning the game. All these moves are actually very good. Rook c4 is one of them. And also here, king e6 is the only move that is actually winning, defending that pawn. d5 is very good. King f5 or, one of these moves, this is still fine. f4, king f5, bishop here, a3, only move. Bishop d7, best move. King f6, rook c6. And here, the only winning move is actually king g7. And I mean, it's actually pretty insane because, I mean, it's kind of the same thing, really. Because if king g7, I just push the pawns, he will end up defending both of them with his rook and bishop. I'll just push the a2 pawn. He has to sack the rook, and eventually I just get a queen, and I win the game. There's nothing special. King g7. There's nothing going on with this passed pawn. So that would have been a very simple way to win. There's just no way for him to defend. Unfortunately, I played king to e7, and here he has some brilliant tactics. And here, and in the game, I still thought that probably white's winning somehow. It wasn't my job to find it, but if he finds a win, I'll be okay. I just wanted to put up a big fight. But it turns out that I didn't blunder a win for him. I just blundered a draw, which is kind of funny. So he played bishop f5, which is a good move. I played a2, already threatening to promote. Rook a6, very good move. b3, threatening to get my pawns going. d6 check, and this is kind of the key difference. Because my king's here and not on g7, there's d6 check, gaining like an extra move. And if I move like here to block the pawn, let me just show. King here, there's rook a8 checkmate with the pawn covering these, bishop these, and of course the rook covering the back ranks. That was something I definitely didn't want to do after all this fight. So what I ended up doing was king f7, because if king f6, this is check, and maybe there's like queening with queening, but I'm not too sure, because if I go here, oh yeah, and then rook a8, and I can't stop a queen with check. So king f7 was the only move. And here he played d7 check, which was actually a blunder. So the way he had to draw this game, or possibly actually maybe even win, I can't remember, was bishop d3, which is not very easy to find. But the idea is that if, well, let's say b2, if I play b2, he takes on a2, I have to take the rook, and now there's a check, winning my knight. And it turns out that this is maybe a win, maybe a draw. I think this looks like maybe a draw. So I blundered a draw because of this sort of bishop d3 and bishop c4 tactic, and defending the queening square. So once again, if my king was on g7, that wouldn't have happened. So that was the difference. But he ended up playing d7, which was kind of a bad move, because, well, I am threatening here, and if I play like king e7, rook a8 once again, and so I had to get my bishop in a more active square. And luckily, because the king is on g1, I have this check, and this is the only move here. Very important check, because if after king e1, now king e7, and if rook a8, I have bishop b6. So that was pretty much a very, very important check. And let's see, what can you do? So here, king e1 is what the computer is saying, and there's some crazy lines. Oh yeah, I guess this was still probably a draw with, yeah, king e1 is actually probably the only draw, because yes, I think he had a draw till here. Bishop, what was the move here? Yeah, d7 was actually still a draw, but after this he had to play king e1 to get his king closer, and then promote the queen or bishop. And in this case, the line goes promote to a bishop, which is funny, and then sack the rook, and then the king is just close enough to not allow knight c3 and b1 queen. So the king had to step up. So that was his last chance. Fortunately, he played rook e8 check, and now I'm actually winning. I'm actually winning after this move, and I still didn't know what was going on. I had a feeling I might be winning, but I wasn't too sure. So I played king f7, and it turns out all the moves, all the possibilities. I was thinking about playing king here, and but I was kind of afraid of letting him queen with check, but it turns out that this is it's a harder win. And now king b4, threatening knight here. So then he checks, and I actually can't go here because of, well, let me show you. If king here, rook takes, and then a check, winning my last pawn. So I have to move king c5 and then make a queen. So that would have been a pretty crazy line, which I just didn't want to get into. So I ended up playing king f7. King f6 was apparently better. And also I was looking at lines like this, but I wasn't too sure. And apparently, yes, because he won my bishop, I guess he can't sack. And and this square is defended and he's winning. Okay. So I couldn't quite take that pawn even with the discoveries. I was looking at lines like this. But I played king f7, and then here I thought when he reached for this rook, so he was making his move, he reached for the rook, and then my heart skipped a beat again because I thought he could play rook e1, and if I play b2, because my king's on f7, he has bishop e6, and then he sacks for the pawn, and then he plays rook b1, and then he basically wins this pawn, because if I move my bishop here, he promotes. So I thought he was winning. I was very scared that he was winning, and then last night when I couldn't sleep, I was still thinking about this game. I noticed that after after rook e1, after rook e1, I actually have moves like king f6, which is crazy, getting out of the check first, and then knight b1. When he plays the attacking move, I have knight b1 here, and then I can make a queen, which was pretty crazy. It's everything's just barely holding together. Literally all my pieces are just barely getting through. Also, another funny line that the computer says is here's knight d1, which is pretty crazy move. I would probably never look at this. I mean, I'll eventually maybe look at this, but it's very hard to look at because it just hangs the knight. But the idea is after takes and b2, bishop e6 is no longer possible because I just take it. So it was basically a deflection of the rook. And now also, why not? Yeah, why not a1? I mean, yeah, eventually, yeah, I'll have to sack some sort of queen, but in this case, it's a queen versus rook in this line, and 3 pawns, which is actually winning even with the 3 pawns, which is kind of crazy. But if we would have gotten into a queen versus rook, I've studied this endgame and I do know it, so that wouldn't have been a problem. But anyway, he played rook 8, which was apparently the better move according to the computer, but I was very happy with this move because I knew that I pretty much knew that I should be. I was pretty confident that I was winning after b2, just threatening a1. So he has to sack the rook. And after the king e2, notice that the king is, instead of on e1 going here, in this case, I can play knight c3 and then promote. And now we transitioned into a bishop and knight versus king. And it turns out that bishop and knight versus king is winning, and I know that, and I know how. But the only problem is there's some extra pawns here. So if he gets to push them all the way, I might not be able to use my bishop and knight to capture them, and I might be a draw. So I was kind of worried about that for a little bit. Also notice that I was looking at lines like this, where if his king tries to trap my knight, fortunately though, the knight has 1 extra square here, and then he can jump to like b5 and my piece start getting out. So it's very fortunate that my knight happens to have 1 extra square. Everything has to be just so exact in this game. It's absolutely insane. Anyway, just play king f3 to try to support the pawns, which I thought was pretty smart. And he played king e4, and I just had to my job was just to find a way to block all his pawns. So I started by just shielding his king, so he couldn't make progress, and also threatening the pawn. He played g4. And here I noticed that these are the squares. So the blue squares are the ones that the king can move to, and I noticed that I can bring my knight into the game here while controlling these two and pushing his king backwards. So I did that. And then that was his only move, and after knight f3, I'm attacking this pawn. And if I take it, obviously it would be much easier to block them. So he played h3, and after I play king takes d7, king e4, knight h4. Also the knight's controlling any sort of entry points for the king. I noticed that my pieces are starting to block his pawns, and I was feeling much more confident about this. After king e5 and king e7, the king is shielded by all the pieces, and if he moves pawns, I can check him and start blocking him. So he moves back, play king here, and he just played king d3, and I was a little bit worried right now, but obviously not too much, because I just have to find a way to win the pawns, and right now they're all forming a little barrier for me. but all I had to do was just start attacking him. And here I noticed that his next move, if he ever plays g5, I could play king g6 and well, yeah, I pretty much I played a waiting move here, because if f5, then the pawns are blocked. If g5, I play king here, and now all these pawns are blocked, so I should be able to win them. And so he played f5. If you move the king back, this is the only square to keep defense of the pawn, I would have been able to win it. And if king here, just take the pawn. So he ended up pushing it, and I just I didn't want to. I was looking at king g5, and then I could have just blocked it like this. I could have gotten to it, but I decided to play one more waiting move. His king has no squares. He has to give up something, and then I played bishop f4, and of course I managed to complete my mission of blocking all the pawns, and now it's only a job to win them. So there's a little barrier here formed by the bishop and knight, so he has to move the king away. And to win the pawns, I just have to start with the base. So I just play knight f3, knight g1, and took the pawn, and then I blocked it with my king, so I can capture the other pawn safely. And then over here, it's very important not to take with the king and blunder a draw. So I took with the knight. And over here, we're finally into a very known winning position, knight and bishop versus king. And luckily, I've studied this endgame quite a lot, and I know that there's a couple key things about this. So the only place where the white king can be forced to get checkmated is the corner that's the same color squared as the bishop. So the king can only be forced checkmated in one of these corners. But if he gets his king into the other corner, there's a very kind of easy sequence of moves or patterns that I can just push him into one of the other corners. So if he goes to a light square corner, I just show my technique. So I was feeling pretty confident, and the only difference here is pushing the king towards side or corner. And the way to do that is to just start blocking squares around the king to push him to or backwards. So I've got my king in the center. Now I just need to take away some of these squares, for example. Now all these squares are defended, and I just wanted this square to be defended by the knight, so I brought it back here, and then I put my king up, and now I notice that all these squares are defended, so I'm kind of pushing his king in a bind. And here I actually made a little bit of a mistake. It's not very obvious. I played king e6. Better was king d4, because after well, let me show you what happens in the game. What he could have done, he didn't do this. He played king b2, which allows me to checkmate faster, but what he could have done is actually escape this little blockade with king a4, and then I can't really stop him from going outside in this corner. So the table baseline goes something like this, and eventually there's a little barrier formed by the bishop and knight and the king, and black's king is trapped. This is obviously not in my preparation. It wouldn't have gone like that. I would have tried to get him in this corner and then use my known sequence of moves, but that would have been his last chance. And notice that here it's actually much harder to keep him in. The key position I would have liked is, let me just show, is a position where the bishop is actually controlling the escape square. So the king is shielded like this, and the bishop controls that square, and this will end up pushing his king this way. And usually the knight will be controlling this other square from over here eventually, or otherwise get my knight to this square or something like that, and I should be able to make a wall. But in any case, that was his last chance to prolong the game. He played king b2, and now looking at the squares I control, I need to, well, these are all the squares I control. His path out is over here. So I played knight b3 and then knight a4, and now let me just show you. These squares are all controlled by me. And now he's in a wall, and I just have to make it smaller. Okay, this nice little pattern. I'm making a little wall with my knight. He's forced to move back, and now this is the pattern I was talking about over here, which is the king and the bishop making a, in this case, a 2x2 area. So this is these are the only squares that he can move in, and all I needed to do now is to bring my knight to defend this extra square with check, and then checkmate. So I found a way to do that. Check. This square, no, this area is still covered, and then he has to go to the corner, and finally, now that the knight controls that, I can play bishop to c3. Checkmate on the 97th move of the game. Finally was able to checkmate. And what's surprising is that over here, besides the 3 inaccuracies somewhere like in the middle of the game, the only blunder I ever made, and also notice 95% accuracy, the only blunder I ever made is this king move. This king move that was not super obvious, considering he had like 2 minutes on the clock or less than 5, and I had probably like 10. It's not very obvious, but this was the only blunder I made this entire game. And throughout the entire game, I didn't know what to think. I thought he was winning most of the time, and I thought I was making blunders left and right, but it turns out that I was never losing, and I was mostly winning the entire game. And that just blew my mind. This sacrifice right here, let me just find it. Right here, this move, knight takes c3. I'm still shocked that it's actually winning for black. I literally cannot believe this. And, well, that was the game. I ended up with 3.5 points out of 5. I did end up splitting a little bit of a prize, which was $50. Which sounds good until you realize that the entry was $100. So I did end up earning that, and I was very happy. I could barely sleep this night. But it turns out that I only made one blunder this game, but I actually did make another blunder, which was after the game. So because I was so excited about winning this crazy game, and we were talking, and I was trying to give my address for the tournament organizers to send me the check, I forgot my chess setting clock on the floor. So it turns out that that was my final blunder, forgetting my chess setting clock. Luckily, they found it, and I just have to pick it up. But it was just overall a crazy day, crazy game, and I hope you enjoyed it just as much as me. All right, thanks for watching.